Hello, everyone, and welcome to Making the Right Choices for Your Utility, incorporating community priorities into investment decision making. We are going to get started in just another minute or two as more people are logging on, so please sit tight. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Making the Right Choices for Your Utility, incorporating community priorities into investment decision making. I see that we have a number of people logged on, so we're going to get started here soon for the Augmented Alternatives Analysis process. My name is Tori Bahi from Ross Strategic, and I'm here in support of EPA. And I just first wanted to thank you all for taking time out of your schedules to learn more about the Augmented Alternatives Analysis process. And I know our speakers are very excited to share this valuable information with everyone. And before we get started with our presentations, I'm just going to go over a couple logistics. So first, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending out those slides and the recording information to registrants within a week. Also to note, participants will be in a listen-only mode. However, we encourage you all to please submit questions using the Q&A function, which is in that box below. And we'll be monitoring these questions and respond to as many as possible during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And if you are having any Zoom logistical problems, please feel free to use the chat function. But if you have any questions for the presenters, we ask that you please use the Q&A. If at any point you are having any audio difficulties, you can call in with any of these numbers and use that webinar ID down below. But we're all very excited to talk to you all. And before we get started, we just want to get an idea of who we have in the audience. So you should see a poll box pop up, and we're asking two questions. The first question that we're asking is, please indicate the sector that you work in. We have utility, state or local government, federal government, consultant, water association / organization, and other. And if you do not see a pop-up, poll pop-up, you can also use the chat function to type in your answer. And I'm just going to give people another 30 seconds to answer. And you'll also see that we have a second question as well of, if you've heard of the Augmented Alternatives Analysis, or we'll be referring to as the AAA in this presentation, and there's yes or no, and I see people have already started answering that, so we're very excited to hear that. All right, so Kathy, Ed, Leslie, Michelle, right now, I'm going to end the poll right now. So in our audience, we have about 51% of our audience are from state or local government, 15% are with utilities, 14% are with the federal government, and the remaining are consultants, within a water association or organization, and other. And people have heard of the AAA process. Overwhelmingly, 80% have said no. Well, we're very excited to say that after this presentation, that 87% will turn into a yes. So we're very excited to share this information. And I know that we've had a couple people join us right now. So again, welcome to the Augmented Alternatives Analysis Process webinar. If you are in the wrong webinar, we encourage you to stay because I'm sure you'll learn something very valuable today. So thank you all so much. And you have heard my voice for the majority of this webinar, but I just wanted to welcome our today's speakers, and I'll start off with Leslie.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Leslie Corselli, and I am in the Office of Wastewater Management at the US EPA. Really glad to have you all here today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Maidley. I work with Leslie at the EPA, and I'm in the Office of Community Revitalization. Turn it over to Ed.
Hi, I'm Ed McCormick with McCormick Strategic Water, a contractor to EPA. Some of you may have known me as a recent past president of the Water Environment Federation with over 30 years of public utility experience.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kathy McKagan. I am the program manager at the Highline Canal Conservancy and excited to be with you all.
You're on mute, Tori.
Tori, you're muted.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I feel like this. Anyway, hello everyone. My name is Tori Bahi. I am a consultant with Roche Strategic and am in support of EPA. So thank you all so much for joining us today. And I am going to turn it over to Leslie and Michelle for opening remarks.
Thanks so much, Tori. So she got the speaking on mute out of the way for all of us, hopefully. Thanks for taking one for the team, Tori. Welcome, everyone. We are just so happy to share this infrastructure planning process with you today. Hope you're going to find it really interesting and useful. I was a little disheartened to see that 87% of you have never heard of our Augmented Alternatives Analysis planning process. So really glad to have you again. And we're gonna have to work harder to change all that. I just want to harken back and give some thanks to my colleague, Jim Horn. I'm not sure, I haven't looked to see if he's attending the webinar or not. If you are, hi, Jim. And Andy Cricken, who is the former manager at the Camden County Municipal Utility Authority. They kicked off this process back in 2015 and 2016 and had great success with going through the planning process with Camden's long-term control plan. So we wanted to take it a step further, and I think you're going to enjoy what we've got today. We have actually one of our project participants, Kathy McKagan, is with us. So you're not just going to hear about the tool itself or the process itself. You're also going to hear from someone who's actually walking through the process, step in the steps. And so with that, I just thank you all for being here again, and I'll hand it over to my colleague, Michelle.
Thanks, Leslie. Yes, this is really exciting. And I'll just say a little bit about the partnership that Leslie and my offices have now, which is really exciting. In the Office of Community Revitalization, we work with communities on a range of planning issues to help them in the ways that they're trying to become more sustainable, equitable, and thriving places. And this is just a really great intersection of bringing together those kinds of interdisciplinary partnerships and collaborations at the local and regional level. And so I think Kathy's story is really going to illustrate that. So really excited to be here and excited to dive in. So thanks all. And I think our first speaker is Ed. So I'm going to pass the baton to you.
Thank you, Michelle. So I'll be providing an overview of the Augmented Alternatives Analysis. This is a process, really an EPA process designed by utility leaders. It was mentioned that Andy Cricken of Camden County was a key player working with EPA to help develop this process. And I think the thing to keep in mind about Augmented Alternatives Analysis is that it allows you on your major capital programs, major capital projects, to do two things that traditional alternatives analysis has maybe fallen a bit short on. One is integrating community priorities into your decision making, having the community influence. And the second is focusing on a triple bottom line criteria so that not just the typically more quantitative economic criteria or perhaps environmental, but also the traditionally more subjective social criteria. Next slide. So 3 of the organizations that have already used the AAA process, Camden County is mentioned. So here we're talking about a large city that's a water resource recovery utility. On the other end of the spectrum is the city of Saco Water Resource Recovery Department. This is a small town in Saco, Maine, also a water resource recovery utility. Some of you may know Howard Carter, who runs that utility. And then with us today, Kathy McCaig, who is representing the Highline Canal Conservancy. And this is not a utility, but a nonprofit organization that is working with 11 different jurisdictions and water districts to help them reach decisions about how to move a stormwater program forward in the Denver area. Next slide. So 3 of the really key attributes of this AAA process, again, is it facilitates meaningful community engagement up front in your project. It helps you quantify those qualitative criteria. These are things that are subjective, hard to put numbers to. And I think the process really does a great job in helping you do that in a way where you can compare multi-benefit alternatives. And then finally, it helps to address the financial constraints that every utility has through it's community influence, but it's clearly staff-driven. Staff is in the driver's seat ultimately with decisions, but the difference here between traditional and in the augmented analysis is that the community has a voice that can influence the decision process. Next slide. So here's a glance at the 10 steps of an augmented alternatives analysis. And so initially at the very top of that, launching your alternatives analysis, which would typically start as a traditional would with identifying your capital project alternatives. Where it departs next is understanding community priorities before establishing very broad project goals, and then drilling down to objectives that start to become more measurable, establishing criteria all the way down to metrics so that you can evaluate the performance of each alternative. And at the end of the day, once you've incorporated cost considerations in comparing your alternatives, choosing what's your best fit alternative, and then clearly communicating that decision process back to the community. Next slide is going to show 3 of the 10 steps where the augmented alternative analysis goes beyond the traditional analysis that we typically use. And I spent many years managing the engineering at the East Bay Municipal Utility District, daringly known as East Bay MUD. And the 3 distinctions with traditional is 1, understanding those community priorities up front. Then step 4 is we're actually ranking the importance of the goals as opposed to just weighting. In a traditional, you're weighting criteria typically not at the high broad level of goals. And then the other difference is that step 7, where you're creating very specific performance ranges so that you can, in a multi-benefit project, compare what used to be apples and oranges. We help turn this into apples and apples for you. Next slide. So up front, identifying project alternatives. This is just an example to give you a sense for what I'm talking about. Let's say you've got a project where you need to increase your wet weather capacity to meet your consent decree, and just sort of a hypothetical 3 project alternatives. And you could have more, you could have just 2 alternatives. 3 seems to be a number that a lot of utilities land on after winnowing down, many more alternatives. In this case, 1 is expanding your treatment capacity to address your wet weather. A second could be expanding its just storage capacity, whether it's using tunnels or storage basins. And then a third alternative could be a combination of treatment and storage expansion. So once you've identified your project alternatives, then you go through the 10-step process in order to, at the end of the day, select your alternative that has the highest benefit to cost ratio. So next slide, we're going to start moving through the 10 steps. So first step is really understanding community priorities. And a way to do this is to establish and engage a community group or a task force and just develop and prioritize the community priorities relative to the function of the utility. What we recommend here is doing this on a perhaps even a 3 to 5 year basis. So this is not something that has to be done major project by major project, but because the community priorities will not change that quickly over time, but to establish community priorities up front that can be used to influence goals and objectives on future capital projects over the next several years. Now, we found that with the three that have used this to date, that utility staff obviously participate, and sometimes elected officials have also participated as part of a community group. And then finally, convening the group to explain how the community priorities that they develop will influence the utility's capital investment decision-making process going forward. Next slide. So next step is now that you get to the individual program or project, is determining the goals in the description. Goals are very broad, high-level statements, and they're typically, what they do is they give you sort of an outcome or your desired final results that you hope to achieve. And they're typically with, the triple bottom line triangle and either the economic, social, or environmental categories. Again, the triple bottom line. Some goals sometimes cut across. You may have objectives that provide multiple benefits across more than one of those categories. Next slide, please. So here's an example of under the social, environmental, and economic triple bottom line areas of these are 6, 2 per area, 6 project goals. And you can see they're very high level goals like public health, community livability, system resiliency under environmental, ecological enhancement, and then under economic, financial sustainability and stewardship of public resources. On the right of each of those as a project is really a goal description. And that's important because as the group that's going to be making decisions and doing the analysis needs to start to better understand what a broad, say, public health might mean. Okay, so protect and improve human health and safety. Whereas, say, at the bottom, stewardship of public resources, a description that one utility uses, attaining the lowest feasible life cycle cost. So these are examples for you. Next slide. Oftentimes, what we'll find is, you can have more goals. You can have, maybe just 3 goals, but typically a 4 seems to be about a median that we've seen used with the analysis, median number of goals. The first 2 are in green. Those are the social, public health, community livability. The environmental here is ecological enhancement, and then stewardship of public resources being an economic goal. So once you've established and agree on your project goals, next step is to drill down from the broad, and you're going to find as we go from goals to objectives, ultimately to criteria and metrics, you're going from very broad to something that's highly specific and easy to measure, whether it's quantitative or qualitative. Next slide, please. So next we define objectives. So under each goal, typically 1 or more, oftentimes it could even be 2 or 3 objectives per goal. And the idea here is to identify something that ultimately is measurable, that will contribute to the achievement of that goal, and follow the SMART principles. Okay, specific, measurable, assignable, realistic, and time-based. So you can see that we're already starting to drill down from the goal level to something more specific. Next slide will enlighten you a bit on example objectives. Okay, so for example, under the public health goal, protecting and improving human health and safety, you could have, say, 2 objectives here. One is reducing toxins and bacterial growth from receiving water algal blooms. And this is these are real life examples. And the second objective, perhaps reduce human contact with sewage. So now you can see that we're starting with very broad public health, and we're starting to get into more specifics. And as we go to a level below that criteria, now we're starting to get to something that actually can be measured and compared across alternatives. Next slide. So before we move to criteria, next step is ranking the importance of goals. And so these are the 4 goals that we talked about with the goal descriptions: public health, community livability, ecological enhancement, stewardship of public resources. So here's where your group and your various stakeholders, your key staff, perhaps even an elected or more, can participate in helping to rank those 4 goals. Next slide. Show you how we do that. So, for example, the first thing you want to do is identify which is the most important, highest priority goal. And in this case, public health was selected as the goal that was most important to the group. And then each of the other 3 goals, you would compare that to public health and say, for example, with community livability, in this case, the group came together and identified that community livability was about 80% importance of the public health goal, ecological enhancement 40%, and then ultimately stewardship of public resources is 40%. So what we're doing here is we're doing a weighting so that when we do the benefit cost analysis at the end of the AAA analysis, there is a weighting by goal importance. This, I think, is very helpful in helping us achieve, really being able to score criteria in a way that reflects the most important versus the least important goal for the utility and for the community, since all of these goals have been influenced by community priorities. Next slide. So now we get to the established criteria, the step 5 level. And again, going back to the 4 goals that we started with, and we're showing the 2 objectives, under the one under public health, the one down under stewardship of public resources that we did in the previous slide. But for each of the 4, you can see examples of criteria under the 4 goals. Next slide. We're going to be just highlighting those 2 again. And you can see that the criteria of nitrogen loading is now something where once we've established the next step, which is establishing metrics for nitrogen loading, you'll be able to actually quantify and score an alternative as you do your analysis. Next slide. So in establishing criteria, this shows you how you drill down again from broad public health and stewardship of public resources to sort of a medium level of specificity where you're reducing toxins and cost effectively optimizing resource use, in this case, energy demand reduction or renewable energy creation. And your criteria for these 2 objectives, one is nitrogen loading, and then the other is net energy consumption or production. Next slide. Okay, so now we're getting down to where the rubber meets the road, where you're choosing metrics for each of those criteria. And this is a way for you to directly measure the performance of each alternative. Many of these metrics are direct units of measurement, easily quantified using numbers. Examples there, whether it's acres, kilowatt hours, units of time. These are, frankly, the easiest metrics. It could be, say, in one case, the reduction of nitrogen. But then there are other metrics, and we've all, I know I have, and I'm sure many of you out there have had this experience of, gee, how do you get your hands around something that's more qualitative and turn it into something quantitative so that you can compare across alternatives? So in these cases, for example, that design integrity under that community livability goal, these require a bit more care because they don't have clear numerical values. And sometimes it requires the introduction of best professional judgment. I'm sure when we get Kathy, some of what Highline Canal and their analysis have done, there are a couple of criteria where professional judgment needed to be applied because of the subjectivity. Next slide. So we're going to just drill down from that public health, from goal to objective and criteria that we've mentioned previously. And the metric selected for this is a % reduction in nitrogen loading. Okay. So next, we're going to be creating in step 7 the performance ranges in order to do the analysis for each objective and for each alternative. Step 7. So here the step is to create performance ranges. And this is where we scale metrics to allow comparison across things that are otherwise very dissimilar metrics, things like acres or kilowatt hours for different objectives. And so this is a common scale that we would utilize. And the 0, so in this case, we're showing a -5 to +5 scale, where 0 represents a neutral, a no impact outcome. 0 is, for example, where you may have no net increase or decrease in energy production or consumption from a particular project alternative. Where the pluses are to the right side, the 1 all the way up to 5. The 5 would typically be the highest range across all of your alternatives, what you might be able to achieve. And we're going to show you that in a future slide here shortly. And then to the left, so for example, if this were the energy that we were looking at, the 5 would be where you're having a significant decrease in energy consumption, or perhaps even a energy production. And the minus numbers are where you're actually having an increase because of an alternative in your energy consumption. Next slide. Okay, so now we're populating against that public health goal, the metric of % reduction or nitrogen loading. So first, what we determined was we were not going to have a negative scale, and you can make this decision as an organization. For example, that any increase in nitrogen loading is not going to be acceptable, and none of the alternatives would introduce an increase in nitrogen loading. So in this case, there is nothing to the left of 0. 0 being no reduction from today's situation, from your current status quo. That's a 0 score for this particular metric and objective. Whereas what you want to do in the 5 column off to the right is select what's the highest realistic decrease in nitrogen loading that you could achieve utilizing a technology that realistically is potentially in the cards for you to do. And then what you do is across your 5 steps, you can see that it's just kind of pure math, where we, from it's 18 to 36% scores are 1 point. If you can get a 36 to 54% decrease in nitrogen loading, it's 2. And that's just strictly taking that 90%, dividing it by 5, and creating ranges. Next slide. Okay, we can move forward. So next is evaluating the performance of each alternative in step 8. Looking at 2 example goals, the public health and the stewardship of public resources in their respective metrics. You can see here in this example that for your project alternative 1, we've simplified this to just 2 alternatives. In your alternative 2, what your unweighted alternative scores are. For example, an alternative 1, where you're having traditional nitrogen removal, an alternative score of 5, where you're getting 90+% reduction in your nitrogen loading, whereas alternative 2, you're getting perhaps in this case some more closer to 50% removal, and so it only scores a 2. in the percent reduction of nitrogen loading. This perhaps being, say, an example of side stream nitrogen removal. Then looking at a second goal is the percent reduction in net energy consumption. And you can see that for alternative one, you get a very high nitrogen loading reduction, but it's also a very high energy consumption. Whereas in alternative two, the energy consumption is actually significantly lower and a much higher score with alternative two. So the unweighted scores would tend to indicate that alternative two is a much higher benefit score than alternative one. These are before weighting. Next slide, we're going to take a look at both the unweighted as well as the weighted. So next slide, Terry. Thank you. So if you look at the bottom table, the top table is the same thing you just looked at, shows the unweighted. Now you weight the scores. So going back to the weighting of your public health goal is a weighting of 10. So you take that score for project alternative one, the scores a 5 unweighted, and you multiply it by 10 to get an alternative one score of 50 for percent reduction in nitrogen loading. Whereas your alternative two, this is your side stream nitrogen removal, you're getting a score of just 20 because the weighting is 10, but the unweighted score was 2. Looking down at the metric for net energy consumption, the weighting of 4 is much lower, obviously, than the 10 weighting for the public health. But when you include the -2 score for alternative one and the +4 score for alternative two, and then you add those vertically, what you find is for weighted score, alternative one actually scores higher in benefit, total benefit, than alternative two. So this is a very simplified version. When you go through your project alternatives, one, you'll probably have more than 2 alternatives. You may have 3 or even 4. And you'll have multiple goals and multiple metrics associated with each objective. So your table vertically will be much larger. But at the bottom line, you'll have something that looks like this, a weighted alternative score. That's step 9. Now, where the rubber really meets the road is when you move on to the step number 10. Okay, and here's where you incorporate cost considerations, because what you're really aiming for is a benefit cost ratio. Where do you get the most benefit per dollar cost? So in this example, alternative one had a weighted benefit score of 42. Alternative two had a weighted score of 36. Next, we want to take an annualized project capital and O&M costs, because we want to look at life cycle costs. And in this case, alternative one has an annualized total cost of $3 million per year, whereas alternative two is $2 million per year. So when you do the math in the benefit cost ratio, what you can see is alternative two actually has a higher benefit cost ratio than alternative one. And if these are very close, if they have the same score, it gets a little more challenging to reach but ultimately, there's typically some difference across multiple alternatives, and often a significant difference that you just could not intuitively have determined without going through this process, doing the weighting, and scoring each objective against each other. Next slide. Oh, just one other note about incorporating cost considerations. Most utilities would probably just keep the cost in at the end as part of the benefit cost ratio. But there have been, in fact, Camden County had one of their criteria and metric that was associated with cost effectiveness as well. And so you can do that. You can certainly include, under your economic, one of your economic type goals and objectives, something that's tied directly to cost. If there's a particular reason why that's a significant weight to your organization, you can do that. More often than not, it's going to play out in this last slide when you determine your annualized project cost, but it's been done both ways. Next slide. Okay, so you get to the end of the analysis, and now here you are where you're really choosing what's your best fit project alternative. A lot of thought has gone into this. At this point, you've incorporated community priorities into your goal setting for your projects. You've clearly communicated the process to the community and decision makers. And on a project basis, you can involve the community as part of, or other stakeholders, perhaps somebody from a watershed group, somebody from a leader in the community. It's not something that you must only do up front in developing community priorities. You could, on a major project, incorporate your community into your decision-making process as well. At the end of the day, it becomes pretty clear to everybody around the table, members of the community, what your highest benefit cost ratio project alternative is. So what is the importance of involving the community in your project decision-making? Well, really, it's twofold. One is it helps you understand what the needs and desires of the community are. These folks are your ratepayers, and if you're a public utility, like over 95% of the utilities in the US are, the community owns your facilities. And so these are key stakeholders. The other piece, just as important, perhaps more important in some ways, is when they've been engaged in the process, they understand the importance to the utility of a project and how a project alternative has been selected. It is really helpful. My experience has been just extremely helpful to have members of the community become your advocates and support your decisions, particularly when they ultimately will affect rates and potential rate increases going forward. So it's understanding the needs of your stakeholders and then gaining the support of your stakeholders so your utility can move forward successfully. Next slide. So now I'm going to bring Kathy McCaig on. Kathy, with the program manager for the Highline Canal Conservancy, and we've been engaged, EPA and myself and Tori, with this process, and they're just doing an amazing job. I will stop talking at this point and turn this over to you, Kathy.
Great. Thank you so much, Ed. I appreciate the introduction and your overview of the process. And good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you may be. I'm so excited to be with you today to talk about and share our experience of using EPA's AAA process. I want to give a special thanks to both Leslie and Michelle for selecting the Highline Canal Conservancy to apply their methodology. I'll never forget the day, as it was a snowy, cold day, and I was walking along the Highline Canal, and we had just entered the pandemic and working remotely, and my kids were online and trying to figure out online schooling, and it was a really bright moment that we were selected. So thanks again, and also thanks to Ed and Tori for their support in guiding us along this. Today, I'm going to provide some background on the Highline Canal, as well as how we are going to repurpose the Highline Canal to a green stormwater infrastructure facility, how we have applied the AAA methodology to our project, and share some key lessons learned. Tori, next slide, please. So here up on the screen, you will see the Highline Canal. So just to help set this for you, the Highline Canal is an extraordinary community resource in the heart of the densely populated Mile High region, so the Denver metro area. The canal is 71 miles long. So you can see the red line there on your screen. It starts down in the southwest region. It starts at Waterton Canyon, the headwaters of the South Platte River, and it ends all the way up in the northeast corner there near DIA. So if you've flown to our airport, you're actually really close to the end of the Highline Canal. The canal is 71 miles long. It's 850 linear acres. And if you compare that, that is larger than Central Park in New York City. And it's 3 times the size of Denver's current largest park. It has over 350 residents that live nearby the canal, and that probably number has increased. As well as we have over 500,000 trail users who recreate on our trails, whether they're scootering along, bicycling along, horseback riding, or whatever method they choose. And then we have about 24 schools that are abut the canal. And Denver Water currently owns the canal. Next slide, Tori. Here you see, I thought you would enjoy seeing this photo. So this is last century's infrastructure. You can see the South Platte River in the middle there. Off to the side is the irrigation ditch. So it was primarily built as an irrigation delivery system from the foothills, the foothills of Denver, and it ends up to bringing water to the farmers on the plains. It was built by hand in 1883, so that gives you quite a testimony to the engineering feat. It was acquired by Denver Water in 1924, and it was opened for recreation use in 1970. And what I mean by recreation use is that there used to be an old ditch riders trail along the side. Well, that ditch riders trail now is what people use to recreate on. So last century's infrastructure, and Tori, next slide, please, is this century's open space network. For years, the canal has served as part of Denver Water's utility infrastructure, but that times have changed and there's not a need for this irrigation delivery system. And so Denver is the canal's outliving its original use as an irrigation delivery system, and you see more and more people recreating. Next slide. So to help bring new life to this historic canal and to repurpose it as a recreational ecological resource for the community, the Highline Canal Conservancy was formed back in 2016 to help preserve, protect, and enhance the Highline Canal. As you can see on this slide, the Conservancy doesn't do it alone. Our strategy from the beginning has always been about partnerships. The Canal Collaborative, and you see the members listed there, will support the canal's future role as a 71-mile linear park with stormwater management system. You see the members listed there. Those are the jurisdictions and metro districts and as well as stormwater facilities that support and enhance the canal and its future role as a stormwater system. Next slide. And you see here on this slide that we developed 2 planning initiatives over a 5-year process. These 2 critical planning initiatives took place to help shape the future direction of the canal. The first one, the Community Vision Plan there on your left, was done in 2016. And it asked the public and governmental partners what their long-term vision was for the Highline Canal and its environmental and natural resources. The outcome was a set of guiding principles and objectives of what the canal's future holds. The plan for the Highline Canal built on what the Community Vision Plan did. This plan was completed in 2019 and lays out clear guidance for repurposing the historic canal, improving the health of people and in the environment, and increasing accessibility and enjoyment for generations to come. Next slide. Stormwater management is one of the 6 tools found in the plan that promotes the canal's transformation and addresses stormwater management. Here on the slide on the left-hand side, you see the watersheds that intercept the Highline Canal. This provided opportunity and for decision makers and governmental leaders to think about how they can use the canal for stormwater purposes. There's several key reasons why this transformation is warranted. As I mentioned, the canal is outliving its historical use. Denver Water is currently decommissioning the canal as an irrigation delivery system. This is due to the fact that 60 to 80% of water is lost either due to seepage or evaporation. And the unprecedented growth that we're seeing in this region has forced us to reassess the current and future role of the canal. Next slide. So how are we making the case for this transformation? Why is the Conservancy doing this? There were two key studies recently done that helped to elevate the canal and its efficacy as a green stormwater infrastructure system. The first one is the Highline Canal feasibility study. This study concluded in 2014 that the canal that it is technically feasible to use the canal to hold, treat, and store and release stormwater after storm events for water quality purposes. The primary benefits of doing this is to hold the water for 72 hours, and the canal will be wet an additional 100 days. And it's important to note here that it's an earthen channel, and that the water can be cleaned up to 40%. These two primary benefits are really important, and we're provided the foundation for our AAA. Building on the work that was done in the feasibility study, there was the Highline Canal Stormwater and Operations Master Plan conducted and finalized in 2018. As part of the master plan, there is also an operational model, which is an online tool that is available for jurisdictions to use. And this reflects the current conditions and the amount of stormwater making it into the canal, where there are locations for overtopping, and proposes location of infrastructure to address spill locations and water quality. And I'll go on the next couple of slides, I'll go into the proposed infrastructure. The impacts of the infrastructure reuse can be really far reaching, and it also has the possibility to result in many social, environmental, and economic benefits. There to the right is the technical leadership team. As I remarked earlier, one of the strong values of the Conservancy is that we can't do it alone. We have a robust partnerships and stakeholder and collaboration essential to our work. So true is it of the STEP program. Here on the screen, you will see that we formed a technical leadership team comprised of stormwater managers, the engineers, policymakers. We have a person who is the city manager from Cherry Hills Village on it. So we have respected individuals and know-how who are invested in and helping us guide the canal's transformation. Next slide. Okay, so let's dive into, so how are we going to make this transformation possible? So we're going to look at water quality. Based on the studies, we said, yes, the canal can be used for water quality purposes. In the master plan, there are proposed 92 water quality berms. So here on this slide, you can see an example of how stormwater management will look on the canal. For those who are familiar with this area, this is in the city of Aurora, where there's a lot of opportunities to use water quality berms. Those water quality berms can be anywhere, they're about 3 feet high. I'm holding on my hand so you can measure that. And they're about located in every half a mile. It's important to note that although I said the canal is 71 miles long, 62 miles are available for stormwater transformation. So that equates to about every half mile you have a water quality berm. Next slide, Dory. Okay, here is an example where we're going to focus on localized flooding. How are we going to mitigate these localized flooding situations that are happening along the canal? So here's a prime example of another stormwater management system for the canal. You see that there's spill locations indicated on the yellow star. There's 47 spill locations here. So then here are the solutions that we can employ in the canal to address the situations. And the green diamonds are the constructed overflow. So those are opportunities where we can move water away from and reroute it away from the canal to help mitigate floods. The yellow dotted line there kind of in the middle, it's a little bit hard to see off of East Panama Drive. That is thank you, Tori, that is a formalized channel. So we're gonna move water away from and towards a natural waterway. And also there's also opportunity to raise embankments. We recently heard about a study being done with Aurora Water, and they can raise the embankments along their canal to increase the freeboard to allow for stormwater conveyance. Okay, next slide, please. So how are we going to get it done? So here are the 4 stormwater projects that we currently have online. So we're really excited about this, and we have about 9 miles transformed so far. The first development, the first project that I'd like to tell you about is the Solstice development. So this is down near the headwaters of the canal. And this is a developer-driven project. So they saw using the Highline Canal as an opportunity. And they also thought of it as a way of using it, augmenting their stormwater system. So they moved back the earthen banks of the canal. They installed 3 water quality ponds for pre-treatment. That pre-treated water will be discharged into the canal and conveyed down to the next waste gate, which is 3.5 miles down from the development. The next one is City of Greenwood Village. City of Greenwood Village had a lot of existing or standing stormwater. They wanted to formalize that stormwater, and so they entered into an intergovernmental agreement with Denver Water. So that's our utility here in Denver. And that was because of the flood mitigation. They had a lot of flooding concerns, and it was a very highly populated area. And 2.5 miles are transformed there. Looking into the future, they're hopeful that they can install a couple water quality berms once we have some environmental permitting put in place. We're really excited about this next project, City and County of Denver. This has been a long works in the making. They are set to begin construction next month. It's a jurisdiction-led project. It's focused on water quality. They're putting in 3 water quality berms and water quality vaults, as well as a couple of drive-through 4 bays, which they will collect trash and debris before the stormwater enters into the canal, again, already improving it. And last here is City of Littleton. This is the picture here. They recently installed a new stormwater outfall with the design guidelines from the plan for the Highline Canal. This was recently installed in the summer, and it was a developer-initiated project. So they looked at ways of using the canal to augment their stormwater system, to offset some of the stormwater that would be coming onto their site. So they went into an IGA with Denver Water as well, and so they could formalize that stormwater and they convey it down to the next waste gate. Okay, Tori. So let's talk about the AAA. And we're so excited about this process. And one of the cornerstones, I could talk a lot about this, but I kind of highlighted some key areas. And I think Ed really honed in on this idea of community priorities. And when I was reading the draft guide about this, what one element really excited me is about, oh my gosh, this is like you right off the bat, you're getting the community priorities into the decision-making process. That's important for me, both from a professional and personal point, but also more importantly, from the Conservancy standpoint and from our governmental partners. They want to know what the constituents are thinking, and we want to know what our broader set of stakeholders are also thinking. So I'm really excited that the AAA really folds this in on the onset. So here you see we've got 4 goals, Ed. It was hard to narrow it down. It was a great process. We held a webinar with EPA in Maine, and where we outlined the steps, we introduced this process, and then we asked for feedback from the communities. And this is where we landed on. And of course, goal number 1 makes sense given what I just explained to you. It's stormwater management. That rose to the top, so that has a ranking of 10. You'll see each of the associated objectives under it. And for me, objectives it's like a slice of the pie that helps you reach the goal. So the first one, of course, is improving the water quality and supporting flood attenuation, and going down the list, providing stormwater conveyance. Obviously, there's not a lot of room on this slide to go into our criteria and metrics. We have lots of conversations about those, and we provide a good food for thought on that, but you can imagine that there's criteria and metrics under each of those objectives. The second one is community livability. Ed mentioned this to you earlier, and this was really great because it's folding in some of those social and environmental benefits that aren't traditionally used in an analysis process. So where we landed on is enhancing the recreational use and experience, which really makes sense, right? You saw that there's over 500,000 people out there recreating on our trails. We've seen heightened use of the trail given our pandemic. But along with that, we want to improve the environmental conditions. We want to make it have a really great experience for our trail users. So how can we use stormwater to improve the environmental conditions? The next goal is public understanding of stormwater management. This really rose to the top, and for the technical leadership team, they said, wow, I didn't know that people didn't understand it, but that's coming from their mind frame, right? They live and breathe stormwater. So, but for the broader community, I don't know what stormwater means. We see stormwater in the canal, but not a lot of the time. We thought it was always irrigation water. What does it mean to use the canal as a green stormwater infrastructure? So again, we want to also promote what does it mean, green infrastructure, to use the canal as a classroom. The last one is ecological enhancement. That was one of the examples that Ed used. For us, we wanted to maintain or expand the riparian habitat. And the second objective under there is also maintain and expand the native plant and species. And you might be saying, wait a minute, maintain and expand. Those are two different objectives. But if you think about it, we have 11 distinct jurisdictions with whom we work. So we need to be flexible and nimble in our process to allow for a little bit of room for those decision makers, for the staff to go back and say, we want to expand the riparian habitat, or actually our habitat is actually quite good. We just want to maintain it. So using the AAA process allows us that flexibility. And also something important to note, when we got back these goals and priorities from the community, we brought them back to the technical leadership team. And the technical leadership team had an opportunity to review those, discuss them and say, I think these should be ranked at different levels. And I felt really comfortable in that process because they're the experts. They're the staff that are going to have to go back and drive these capital improvements. They're going to have to go back and sell them to internally and up to their, whether it's the city council or the board of directors or the main decision makers, in order to advance these projects. Okay, Tori, next one. Okay, so program alternatives. And I saw that there was a question earlier about program alternatives. You know, shouldn't you do the goals first and the program alternatives? We had a little bit of an idea of a framework of what our program alternatives were. However, I would say that we really cemented them once we dove down further into this process. And it's really important to understand that they need to be clearly defined, because you're going to be evaluating your metrics and your criteria and how you can meet those goals against the program alternatives. So it's really important that they are clearly defined and described, because that's kind of the essence of it. You're like, what am I evaluating this goal against, and how am I going to evaluate it against this different program alternative? So they look nice on the screen, but it did take it was a great thought-provoking process to get to. And we did it through the technical leadership team. So here we go, offsite treatment. So offsite treatment means that we're not going to use the canal for any of our stormwater treatment or management of. Typically what has been used is gray conveyance. So we're going to either pipe the stormwater under the canal, or we're going to pipe it away from the canal. But we're going to do a green treatment though. We're going to treat that water, whether it's an offsite retention basin or a constructed a wetland. So it's a green infrastructure approach there. Next program alternative we landed on is in canal treatment. So we're going to treat the existing stormwater, and we're going to manage it in the canal. And we're also going to implement or install an in-canal project, meaning we're going to install a water quality berm, for example, for the city of Greenwood Village. The last program alternative is in-canal treatment plus enhancement. So again, we're going to do management of the existing stormwater that's already entering in the canal. We're going to install a constructed overflow for those spill locations down in Douglas County, but we're also going to enhance the environment. We're going to plant an additional 50 trees or shrubs per mile, and that's in accordance with the plan for the Highline Canal. So we're going to take that, plus we're going to do that additional ecological and environmental enhancement. Okay, next slide, Tori. So I'd like to share next with you with the key learnings. I had to kind of narrow it down to 4, but it's been such a great process these last 10 months working with EPA and Ed and Tori to really glean in and think about this analysis and how we can apply it to the Highline Canal. So first off, I know it might sound like a cliche, but you really have to have the right people to make it happen. You have to have the commitment from dedicated and knowledgeable experts. You have to have we have the person who actually did the master plan. So he knows all the nuances of the water quality capture volume, and should we be using existing stormwater versus additional stormwater. You have to have the right people to make it happen around your Zoom meeting. But then also what we found that worked really well for us is to have a cohort of the technical leadership team of 3 to 4 members who really wanted to dive in and look at this at a deeper level and think about it. So they were really instrumental in helping us develop the analysis. And then we would always bring those findings and recommendations to the full team, so that I was always seeking full agreement for the leadership team. Again, making it a better and more robust and inclusive process. Next up is making the case to the non-technical audience. This is really key and pivotal for us, because it's important that our community of stakeholders understands what we're trying to do with transforming the canal for stormwater management. It is also imperative that the decision makers, those board members who are sitting on these stormwater authorities, understand the tool and can apply the tool and can make the case for the canal's transformation. So it just helps them make the right decision. And also it's good to know that they can say, a technical leadership team member can say, no, we've vetted this process. We've gotten the community priorities. They're already included in this analysis. So the decision makers are comfortable knowing that their constituents have had an opportunity to provide input. The next key learning is evaluating the suite of options and benefits. And you can compare these benefits, as Ed explained to you, across multiple, against the different program alternatives in a simple platform. He had just a couple examples, but really it simplifies down into a one-page worksheet. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're seeing all this dissimilar criteria across a common scale, and you can get to an end result. And that's the stage we're at right now. So it's really coming together, and it's really offers an opportunity to compare those dissimilar criteria. And also he talked about using the best professional judgment. We did use that a couple of times, just because you want to be able to use qualitative as well as quantitative benefits in your analysis. And having that option of using your best professional judgment allows you a little bit of flexibility in the process. Again, and that's really helpful to us when we're working with multiple governmental partners. And one of the key learnings is advancing the projects. I want to give these decision makers and these people on the technical leadership team the tools to help them identify project potential, to help them advance the projects, and really to actualize the benefits. So it's a really great tool. It's a nimble tool. It's flexible for us. We're kind of not the typical, I would say we're a little bit of an unusual organization to use this tool, but it's great because it's flexible, it's adaptable. We can use it in different ways to meet the needs of the different stakeholders that we have working to advance the canal's transformation. And the last slide. And just thank you. Thank you to all, for everybody coming today to this webinar. I'm excited to answer your questions and just to share a little bit more what we've learned as going about it. And again, thank you to EPA and for allowing us to apply their process with us. And also, if you have an opportunity to come out on the Highline Canal, if you ever find yourself in the Denver area, please do so. It looks a little bit different now. It's not as lush and green right now. It's a little bit brown and there's some icy spots and things, but it's a little bit cold out there. But again, we just thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And I just want to note that we actually had someone write in saying that there's so many great ideas mentioned every second, and then they can't keep up typing all of these notes. I just want to let you all know that we are recording this webinar, and we'll be sending out the slides and the webinar recording to all registrants. So if you had to jump off because of another meeting, or if you had a colleague that wasn't able to join the webinar, but they've registered, we'll be sending out those this information within a week of the webinar. So thank you all so much. And we've had a couple of questions come in through the chat, and we have a couple of questions coming in through the question to answer. So if you do have a question for Ed, for Kathy, for Leslie, or Michelle, please feel free to write that into the Q&A, and it's just that box over there, and that'll just help us keep keep track of everything. So, definitely please feel free to write in your questions. And I know, Kathy, you've been talking a lot and just really exciting to hear the whole process again. I know we've been working together over the past couple of months, but it's been kind of crazy just seeing the process that we've been through and very exciting to kind of get towards the end. So I just want to give you a little break and get some water, anything like that. But we did have a couple of questions kind of in terms of the process that I want to direct towards Ed. And this is something that Kathy had mentioned before, but just thinking about, Pablo asked a question, asking why goals aren't determined before project alternatives are identified. So Ed, I was wondering if you're able to provide more information. And I know, Kathy, you've already kind of talked about it, but if there's additional information, please feel free to jump in.
Sure, I'll kick this one off. So actually, the first round of the guide that we prepared, the AAA guide, actually had the project alternatives identified way down around step 6. We thought about that because, I mean, technically, you could create all, once you identify what your project is or your major program, you could, hypothetically, there's no reason why you could not create your goals or even go beyond that to objectives and criteria, even potentially metrics. What we realized was that, in that step 6, 7 range, that's a really good time to complete, sort of refine your project alternatives. We thought it would be important up front to avoid any potential perception that the development of objectives and metrics and all was kind of a, should we say, cooking the books, to identify your project alternatives up front. Frankly, I think if a utility were to decide that they really wanted to establish the goals once they had their project identified before establishing the project alternatives, that could be fine. So again, we show it as the first step to develop the project alternatives, and we think it's not a bad idea to do it then, but it's not a must do. I do think the sooner you at least have a general project alternatives identified, the better off you are, because now as you go through the different levels of drilling down all the way to metrics, you're in a position now of just being able to refine. Because I think Kathy will probably mention that you do learn more as you dig into this analysis and go to objectives and the criteria level, and you think, gee, I think we want to tweak the project alternatives. So long answer to a short question, and the answer is we're showing it as a first step, but I think, frankly, there's no reason why an organization utility couldn't have it be a step right after the goals and turn it into a step 2. Kathy, did you want to weigh in on that question? Or anybody else?
Sure, I think I gave that. We had an idea of what the program alternatives could be. But again, I think we helped to flesh, we kind of have an idea, stormwater, gray, green plus. But once you got into the nuances of it and you really had to define it, because that would help them better identify how they would evaluate it across the dissimilar criteria. So you had to make it broad and in such a way that it would be, you would be able to measure the different metrics on there. So it was just, I would say you'd have to have it kind of a little bit in the back of your mind, but it really goes into, once you get into the meat of it, you have to have a really good understanding of what the program alternatives are. Program alternatives are.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Ed. So another question that we had, and I know Kathy kind of mentioned about that best professional judgment. Would you be able to give an example of a metric that uses more of a qualitative item? As Ed has mentioned, design integration. And if you don't have that at hand, Ed, if you're able to provide some context for either Camden or some other examples that you might have of using a qualitative metric as opposed to the nitrogen one that we gave.
Sure, I can use one. Say, for example, we had public understanding of stormwater management. I'm just looking at this now. So we obviously want to increase public understanding of stormwater management, but that's a little bit, how do you quantify that? Like, how do you measure that? So we're going to use, and how does each jurisdiction apply that? So we gave them deference to say, use your best professional judgment in determining the increase in a public's understanding of it, whether it's the number of times that you talk about your stormwater project, or that the Conservancy is out on the canal and doing outreach to the people, the trail users, or so there's different ways we can say how we are going to increase that public's understanding. One of the ways the jurisdictions can do this is meeting their municipal storm sewer permit requirements, their MS4 permits, where they have outreach requirements, but that is just a small subsection of increasing the measure of the community's understanding of stormwater management. So again, we give deference to using the best professional judgment on that one.
I can throw in another example, and this is something that the city of Saco, Maine used. They were very interested in one of the criteria tied to objective and criteria tied to the likelihood of being able to obtain either grant or SRF low interest loan funding for their projects. So across the alternatives, what we used there, because it is a little subjective, was high probability, medium probability, and low probability. So the high was a score of 5, medium was a score of 3, and the low probability, I believe, was a score of 1. And then some professional judgment was utilized. But if you think about it, the things that help, that make it easier to obtain funding is, for example, one of their alternatives engaged other partners, other organizations. So if you've got, say, a handful of utilities coming together seeking funding jointly, that usually carries a lot more weight with those that do the funding. And also, an alternative, had high sort of sustainability scores. And that's another area. Sometimes, I know I'm based in California, our state EPA basically has higher scoring for green projects versus gray infrastructure projects. So those are the kind of things you can use to weigh what's really subjective criteria. And that's the way Saco, Maine has chosen to use it.
Thank you. And so we've had a flurry of questions come in, so I'm just trying to organize it. But one thing I think is really interesting that someone asked is, Kathy, as you mentioned, you were approached by EPA and we've had that conversation. But if you are a community member listening to this webinar and thinking, oh, wow, this would be a really great process, how would you suggest community groups engage with their utilities to use this process?
Communities to engage with EPA to use this. I think once it, and I deferred, like Leslie or Michelle to provide input. It's just, I would say the EPA wants to, for us, EPA wanted to work with us. They thought, because we had a broad swath of stakeholders with whom we engage with. So that was a prime opportunity. We already had those people kind of in place, but I think the tool wants to be more broadly used. Right. And they wanted to get out there into the community. So I would just encourage you to seek out opportunities to engage with it and see what you can do. And also, if you have a focus on that kind of that lens of the triple bottom line, the social, economic, and environmental benefits in which you are focusing on your project.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I mean, I think there are a lot of considerations for how if a community could bring this tool to a utility and how that would work. I mean, we would love to see that, but sometimes there are existing networks or partnerships that utilities and community-based organizations might be already kind of at the table. And I think that would be a great way to kind of introduce a concept like this when there's kind of at least that structure in place. I would say the other thing that we've heard both from Kathy and then our partners in Saco is that there is that this is a great way to communicate with both like community members and community decision makers that might be elected officials. So I think there's a variety of like pathways for how this, this can come up with all of the decision makers in the community, kind of sharing with each other that this is an important way to kind of formalize a process of embedding community values into capital investment decision making. So great question.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll just even top that off. Hopefully I can be the cherry on the sundae. But in the case of Saco, they actually developed their stakeholder group based on their project. And so I think, it's going to, I hope it doesn't sound cheesy, but I think it starts with dialogue. So the community wanted to work with the utility. I think that you could reach out to the utility leaders and open the dialogue. And I think, I haven't met too many utility leaders that are opposed to interacting with the community on some level. And the thing that is so great about this tool, my favorite thing, is that it creates this transparency for the utility, kind of let the community know what they have to do and then the community gets to communicate back what their priorities are. And so just start with a dialogue.
And I think it's important in selecting whether it's a citizens advisory committee or a task group that you put a lot of thought to identifying and selecting group members that reflect the diversity of the community. It can be not just community leaders or ratepayers, customers, but watershed partners, could be somebody from the Chamber of Commerce, could be council members, as previously mentioned. It could be a representative from a local NGO. So there are ways, but it is important, particularly in this day where equity is becoming a bigger issue in the water sector, to make sure that that you do have a community group that's reflecting the diverse background of your community.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you all. I know there was a question that was posed earlier, just kind of thinking about equity, and I know that's been a topic of interest of late, which is really great to hear. And someone had put in the chat, Leslie, elaborating more on selecting stakeholders. And I don't know if you have any additional tips on that. I know Ed kind of highlighted that, but if kind of from your perspective, if you have any if you're able to elaborate more on how utilities or how organizations can select their stakeholders.
Yeah, and so from an EPA standpoint, I think that Kathy and Ed would have a lot more experience finding community stakeholders than we would. Everyone that we work with is a stakeholder, but I will say this is sort of a general comment that I'm going to make, because I know there were a few questions about environmental justice and equity in the QA box. So some programs, some utilities, and some communities already have very strong equity and environmental justice programs. Some don't. So, but also some utilities have very strong programs and initiatives, or missions even, we could say. And so I think that as long as you're trying to be as holistic as you can and include everyone, again, start with the dialogue, develop it as fairly as you can, and just work from there. It's very general, I know, but each utility and each community is different.
Thank you, Leslie. And I mean, absolutely, Kathy has mentioned, they're working with 11 jurisdictions and having to create that flexibility within their, their objectives, as Kathy mentioned, having that maintain/expand. So I think, definitely maintain that flexibility and just kind of looking at your community and seeing what's going to be the best fit.
And I think it's important to note, that you just need to, our swath is large. We always try to incorporate as many and reach out to as many stakeholders as we possibly can. Equity is a big focus for us in STEP as well as in the Conservancy. And we have, very affluent communities in which the canal traverses through, and not as, a more poor or more disadvantaged communities. So we always have that lens and looking at it from a social perspective on that, and identifying, again, using this tool to advance those projects to enhance the environment in those communities where they may not have as much resources. So it's a strong point and a strong focal point for us now.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I think it's also including community members and having that diversity of the community reflected in the community involvement process. And it's also, I think, one benefit of this tool and having kind of a process outlined is that it takes that community input and priorities and allows you to incorporate that into the goals that get weighted along with all the other considerations like cost and technical feasibility. So I think, it's not implicit in the process, but I think done well, which we've really seen from our partners like Kathy and our partners in Saco too, that it can be kind of baked into the process, which I think, leads to outcomes too that are delivered equitably.
So establishing a community group, it does, in a way, it's really relationship building to your community, it's trust building. If you wait until it's time to put an interceptor down a street to reach out to folks, frankly, it's too late. What you really want is to develop a relationship with key community leaders up front and maintain that over the long haul, so that when you do have projects come up, these are folks that are really ambassadors for your utility. I've been at heated public meetings where I've had community ambassadors responding to concerns from other members of the community. It's kind of nice as a utility leader to hear that, to see, because they understand the needs of the community and how the community's needs were baked into the project decision.
Thank you all so much. And definitely, we've seen some comments on here that, building relationships is exactly kind of the way to go. So thank you all for that insight. Kind of not moving away, but there's some other questions kind of more on the technical aspects of the process and, thinking about transparency. And someone had asked, if you've done the weighting and you have an alternative that has an unexpected result, does that kind of prompt the utility, the organization to think about re-weighting? And is there a way of doing that sensitivity analysis with the weighting and the scoring? And so I know that, we have this 10-step process, and once you've completed one step, you go to the next. And so Ed, I was curious if this
Sure.
is something that you've seen, or if you have an opinion on this.
Sure. Yeah. I've to be honest with you, I've seen maybe a couple of slight surprises. I've not seen any major surprises because it's a very comprehensive, detailed process. A lot of discussion goes into every step. But I would say this: if once you've made decisions and move forward, if there's something shockingly surprising, you certainly want to go back and make sure that there wasn't some error in judgment, or just a math error somewhere in any of your steps along the way. But I would advise against going back and adjusting scores by project alternative. If you've truly done this process in a way where you had a good diversity of stakeholder and a lot of discussion, and at the end of the day, sometimes there are some surprises. It may be that at the time you've identified the alternatives, you didn't necessarily know that the operational cost was going to be so high, or that the benefits, were, perhaps in one of the three triple bottom line areas and not so much in the other two areas. So I think it's a pretty comprehensive analysis, and it's always possible that there could be surprises, but I haven't seen it yet in the three analyses that we've completed.
And I would just add, and I agree with you, Ed, in your assessment, you have to have it's a well-vetted process. You have to take your time from each step because it builds on it. And if you were to see kind of that unexpected result, you know, you would go back and look at your metric that you were using and to make sure that it was clearly identified, so that you could actually measure it. So, and again, it goes back to having that team with you, to having those people who are the experts in the room reviewing it and analyzing with it. And you've got the experts from Ed and Leslie and Michelle guiding you along in that process. So you shouldn't really see a surprise, but sometimes that surprise might be good and it's going to tell you a different story.
Thank you, Kathy. And I know you all are in the midst of evaluating, so hopefully there hasn't been any too big surprises, but um, and I think I'm looking at the time right now, and I know that we're about 5 minutes from the end. So I think we might have a question for one more question, and then I'll hand it over to Leslie and Michelle. But Kathy, I was wondering if you could kind of talk about for the goal ranking, how did that process look for Highline, for the Conservancy, and who was involved in the ranking, and just how was that done? Did you do it collectively as a group, or was it people were able to rank on their own time?
Sure, that's really good. Really good question. They were a part of that EPA webinar that I mentioned. So the goals were, they had a defined set of goals that Ed showed you a subset of those on there. And then, so that was solicited out all to the webinar registrants. So everybody who attended the webinar and everyone who received an invitation actually received that form as well. So we tried to gather a lot of stakeholder input on that. And then once we actually, it was the EPA who got those results back and presented the results to us. And we brought it back to the again, going back to the technical leadership team, and they were able to review the results and see where the goals, where they fell and how many people thought stormwater management was the most important one, or community livability. And then based on that, we could shuffle those goals. We didn't do maybe one or two of them, just because we, again, working with the experts, the staff members who know how to implement the projects and how to get those projects across the finish line, we relied on their expertise and their internal knowledge of it in order to rank those goals and prioritize them. So that's how we ended up with it. And it took, if I remember correctly, a couple of times to land on that. And then right now we are following back with all of our communities of stakeholders and reporting back to the community stakeholders on where we landed on those goals. So that way they are informed and they're like, oh, okay, our voices are heard, and this is how our input was received into the process.
So just to add to Kathy's response, so both for the community priority determination, as well as the analysis of project alternatives, individual members carry equal weight, after hearing from technical experts and all. But at the end of the day, whether somebody is an elected official or whether they're a ratepayer in the community, they've got the same mathematical score. Proration of their score is just all just simply taking a mathematical average in scoring it. So I think that helps lend to credibility, because sometimes if you make a collective group consensus decision, it's sometimes just the loudest voice in the room, and you want to get away from that.
Thank you, Ed and Kathy. I realize that we are unfortunately at the end of our time, so I just want to thank everyone for submitting questions. This has been really great, and just, again, excited to see this process go through. So I'm actually going to hand it over to Michelle and Leslie for some closing remarks. Michelle?
Thanks so much, Tori, and thanks so much for being our facilitator and moderator today. This has been a great discussion, and great to hear, Kathy, your story about the Highline Canal Conservancy, and of course, thank your whole team, Josh and Jack and the TLT and the STEP and all of the jurisdictions. It's really incredible, and we're grateful to get to work with you. And then thank you, Ed, for walking us through this process, which is a lot, and just really appreciate it. So I'll just say thank you and turn it over to Leslie.
Well, I'm going to echo what Michelle said. Thank you, Kathy, Ed, Tori, well done. And thank you, Kathy, to you and all of your group. This has been a really great experience. I hope that all of you who joined us today find this valuable. insightful, hopefully. I see that on this final page, I thought we would have contact information for Michelle and I. And Tori, do we have the last slide with that?
Unfortunately, we do not, but when I send out the webinar recording and slides, I will be sure to include Leslie and Michelle's contact information, so you'll have their email information with the slides and recording.
Great. So thanks, everybody. We appreciate questions, comments, feedback. We really want to kind of get this out and start to see it working without us around all the time. So we're happy to answer any questions that you have. Thanks again, everybody. Well done.
Thanks all.